Hello, welcome back to the Single Malt Review. It's time for another bourbon, in a bourbon-heavy little session of filming we're doing this weekend. What's this one?
Well, from the Wild Turkey Distillery in Kentucky, it is Russell's Reserve, 10-year-old. So it's a family operation. Son Eddie Russell, his father Jimmy Russell. Hopefully won't be rustling any Jimmys today though with this
Hopefully
90
not.
proof
Hopefully not.
bourbon.
Well, bottle on the table, keep those Jimmys stable, and hopefully that will be the case for us. And I've already tried this one, so I've almost drunk the whole bottle, but it is, I think, a rather good age statement bourbon in a world with, I guess, increasingly more 10-year-olds, decreasingly less 12-year-old. So maybe that's the golden number. Jolly White labels, the studio lights always explode those, but you just maybe use your imagination. It's you know what it looks like. It was on the thumbnail. So
45%, same strength as the no age statement Bullet bourbon we tried in our last bourbon review.
Popular strength for bourbon, and it's a strength that I quite like as well, because it usually means it's strong enough that you don't need to put water in, and not too weak like maybe a 40% would be. Now there's a I hope you can't hear that, but there's a cat trying to break into our studio here, but we're going to ignore it and it might go away. So from the Wild Turkey Distillery, as you say, they've got their own distillery, which is fairly uncommon that a bourbon will actually share the name of where it came from, because most of them are brands and they will come from just a handful of big mega distilleries. So, but Wild Turkey, fairly big company on its own, producing you have to call it a plethora of different bourbons. They have got their own distillery, and that's where this one comes from. So probably a little more hands-on than some of the other ones. And
nice bright hue.
Yeah, in terms of what sort of a bourbon it is a really very dry bourbon, which I find more and more when you get into the sort of premium barrel picks, bourbons get drier and drier, because I think that's less and less common to get a dry bourbon that's good. So that's sort of considered the good stuff, I suppose.
It's not super sweet, but it's not lacking in that department either. The nose is putting me in mind of buttered pancakes with maple syrup. It's oddly specific for a nosing note, but that's what's coming to mind, so that's what I'm going to call it.
What I get, I am going to say that we just did the Bullet, and that one had quite a malty, sweet nose. This one, hugely savoury. It smells absolutely like fresh popcorn to me, minus the butter. Fresh plain popcorn, and that's a real distinct nose of a very, very corny whiskey. Yeah. Whiskey with a big heavy corn bill on it. And
it's so if you'd added the butter, I'd see where you're coming from, but I'm honestly not getting popcorn, which is good. It means we're getting different things out of it, and that's how it should be. But
popcorn I always get in what I always assume are really, really heavy corn bills on the mash bill for your bourbon. But beyond that, there's quite a lot of toasted nuts. There's just a little hint of peanut there, which you only get once out of a blue moon in bourbons, but it will crop up somewhere. There's plenty of your usual nuts, almonds, which you get in almost every bourbon, and there's quite a lot of toasted, honeyed, candied, you'd call it in America, character coming along with those nuts. They're quite sweet nuts coming on there, and not so many spices on the nose. There's just a smattering of clove and cinnamon, along with the huge amount of vanilla that sort of comes with the territory of bourbon. But yeah, otherwise nutty, savoury, dry is what's on the nose. What's the taste speaking to you though?
Big lashings of caramel and toffee, loads of vanilla, a bit of a nut brittle, almonds and peanuts with caramel, hints of butter and salt.
Yeah,
perhaps some of those popcorn notes starting to emerge.
This is actually really quite a deep bourbon. Bourbons often have a significant breadth of character. They'll taste of quite a few different things at once, because they're quite loud things, I suppose. Not to make them sound crass or anything, but whereas Scotch whisky can be quite subdued, quite subtle, bourbons are very, very rarely subtle, which is very understandable given how they're produced. Always fresh oak, hugely hugely bombastic corn spirit for the most part.
A core of big.
There are drinks that are comprised of big, hard-hitting flavours, and you'll sort of see them all in a row. It's quite unusual for those flavours to have significant depth or nuance to them, and this one really, really does, which is quite fascinating for me as a sometime bourbon drinker, most of the time Scotch drinker.
This is odd. There's a distinct lack of the kind of wood smoke or charred wood element you get in some older bourbons. But what there is, though, after that second or third sip, on the finish, there is bubblegum. That is not something I've ever expected. I don't know if you're getting that.
Actually, no. If I have to do the old recirculation, but as it comes back around the nose, yeah, there is a little bit of hubba bubba on there. There's like a tutti fruity quality. I'll just add a drop of water and see if I can tease anything more out of here.
Just for the sake of, I won't say science, but for comparison's sake, I'll add just a smidge of water as well to see what transpires.
Well, as long as you stick to the metric smidge, and it'll be scientific as it needs to be. That's made it significantly fruitier. Yeah, that has
Here comes the bubblegum and some fruit candies as well.
That has really inflamed the fruit character. And that's another thing I'm not used to getting in bourbon. You don't get a lot of fruit. You get a lot of spice, you get a lot of vanilla, and you get a lot of sort of nuts and caramel and wood. Fruit is usually Scotch whiskey's ball game.
You also don't tend to get much by adding a little water to bourbon. You plunk in an ice cube just to make it cool sipping liquor on a hot day.
No, I don't think
you don't really transform it by adding water like you would to a Scotch.
Depending on the strength, I'm certain you wouldn't get a great deal by adding water to a low strength bourbon. But I wouldn't want to say that you can't unlock some flavours by putting a few drops of water in your bourbon, especially when you're dealing with overproof things that go over 50%. But no, this one has transformed it quite significantly. It's changed the core character of the drink, which is a bit weird. It's gone from a restrained but quite classic bourbon to quite a weird sort of fruit bomb kind of a thing going on here, which is really, really atypical. Yeah,
there's been some very novel, very careful selection of casks to create this, I think.
Yeah, this is, I think I've maybe enjoy other bourbons a bit more. I think Baker's is still if I'm going to reach out for a bourbon and grab it just because I want it, Baker's has still got it for me there. But this is by far the most interesting bourbon I think we've touched on in quite a while.
The most unique and the biggest departure from what we're used to in the style. Yeah,
and that's not to say it isn't Moorish on its own. I mean, I could quite happily sit down and drink the rest of this without any trouble at all. I think scores for this one, and this is a fairly considered score by this point, I really, really like this bourbon. This one is a 92 from me. Yeah. What do you think?
I also rate it highly. It's not up there with my very favourite bourbons, but then not many things are, but it still rates a full 88 from me.
No, this is, without becoming hyperbolic about this is in its own way quite stunning. It's a bourbon where you can really, really, for once, imagine that a lot of thought really did go into the picking of the barrels for this one, and quite a lot of intensive tasting took place to produce something that had a real intensity of its character. Because this is nothing like your regular Wild Turkey 101, which is a really, really solid bourbon, which we'll do at some point. But it's quite unlike bourbon. It's just not. It's very, very atypical, which is really pleasing to see.
You can treat it like a cerebral, sophisticated, mature Scotch. It won't taste anything like any Scotch you've ever had, I'll make that clear, but you can kind of explore it and expand it and expound upon it in the same kind of way.
I think safe to say, as Scotch whisky drinkers, we are pleased at this one. It is really quite up our alley. So there you go. So well done by Wild Turkey on that one. I shall be keeping an eye out for other iterations of this one in the future.
And Mr. Russell.
Because yes, indeed, because Russell's takes on more than one form, and this is just the standard one of them. So I might take another dip in the reserve and see what I can pull out. But in the meantime, everybody stay safe out there, and if you're in the mindset to enjoy a rather cerebral bourbon, then this one probably a good pick for that. But anyway, that's just our opinion as ever. This has been the Single Malt Review. Thank you as always for tuning in. If you haven't subscribed, then goodness me, what are you waiting for? Don't you know how YouTube works? Slanger.